Welcome to this online revision session for AQA FP1, in which we will be considering the January 2010 question 2 on the topic of complex numbers. Well, as you can see, z equals 1 plus 2i is defined, and in the first part of the question it just asks us to work out z squared in its simplest form. So to work out z squared, we just need to take the fact that z is equal to 1 plus 1 plus I, and square it. So when we expand the brackets, we'll get 1 squared, which is just 1, and then we'll get a 1 times an I and a 1 times an I, which will give us 2i, and then we've got I squared as the fourth term. Now we should know that I squared is equal to negative 1 by the definition of the fact that I is the square root of 1, and so all we have left is 2i as the answer in its simplest form. So for the 2 marks there, we'll get a method mark for knowing how to square, and the fact that we got to square the 1 plus I, and then an accuracy mark for getting the result of 2i. Second part of this question, it then says hence show. So the hence is a hint that we should be using the answer from the previous part, i.e. the fact z squared is 2i, to show that z to the power of 8 is 16. So z to the power of 8, we should know, is z squared to the power of 4. Remember, the powers are multiplied together when we do a power of a power. And so this becomes 2i to the power of 4. And we know that 2 squared is 16. And then I to the power of 4, well, we know that I squared is negative 1, and we've got to square that again, so negative 1 squared is positive 1. So our answer is just 16. Again, 2 marks, very similar to the previous one for an appropriate method that works there, and then 1 for obtaining the result that we require. Finally, in part C, we got to show that z star, or if you remember, z star is the complex conjugate of z. So if you remember, z was equal to 1 plus I, so therefore z star is the conjugate of that, so it's the imaginary part that becomes of the opposite sign, so that will become 1 minus I. So we've got to show that 1 minus I squared, that's the z star squared, is the same as negative z squared. So we start with the left hand side. We can show that z star squared is going to be equal to 1 minus I squared, which if we multiply the brackets, we know we're going to get 1 times 1, which is 1 squared. Then we get a minus I times a 1 and a minus I times a 1. That's the next 2 terms. And then finally we got negative I squared. So we should realise that negative I squared, well, a negative times a negative is positive, but I times I is negative 1. And with the positive 1 at the beginning, these two cancel each other out, and we're just left with negative 2i. But we've just shown that z squared was equal to 2i, and so by using that answer from part A, we can say that this is the same as minus z squared, and hence the result we require. So 2 marks for this part again. Realising that we've got to use the conjugate would give us an appropriate method mark for understanding how we get through to the answer for this problem, and then obtaining the minus 2i would be a clear accuracy mark for then realising that that is the same as minus z squared. Well, hopefully you found that solution helpful. For more help with your maths revision, please go to the Further Maths Support Programme website.